So we are discussing dystopias, and we're going to look at dystopian literature later on. So when we use the word utopia in our modern vernacular, we use it to refer to a perfect place. But it's interesting to look at what the Greek actually means. It means not a place. Because why? A perfect place is not a place, right? Instead, what usually happens when you try to come up with a utopia is that it turns into a dystopia, which we'll talk about in a second. I want us to, we're not going to actually write this down, but I want us to kind of throw around some ideas of what our idea of a utopia would be. Okay. Yes. So I'm going to put a pin in that because heaven would be, for us, for believers, is really the only utopia that could actually come into existence and be true and real. So let's, let me fix that. I'm going to turn that off for a second. Okay, let's take heaven off the table for a second. So let's think about utopia here on earth. What would be your perfect world?
A world where everyone's at peace with one another.
Okay, so no fighting, peace. Great. What else? Well, let's just take that. Okay, so no fighting and peace. What would have to change in order for us to achieve no fighting and peace?
People would have to stop being selfish.
Okay, they would also need to have the same belief system, right? Or the understanding to accept all beliefs.
It would have to be a one world thing, pretty much, which would lead to even more chaos. So.
Right. Okay.
It's kind of hard.
So what about, like, some people might say no one would have to work, maybe? That could be someone's idea of a utopia. Well, then how does any of the work get done? That's important work. Okay, so that's out of the question. Some would say, well, no one would go hungry. Okay, which might lead to, if you ensured that no one went hungry, that might lead to people not working or rationing of the wealthy, right? So that couldn't work. Anything else?
I feel like with all these utopias, there's just a what if question that throws it off completely.
There is, right? Because it can't happen until, like Matthew said, until we do get to heaven. I like that little drawing there. Okay, so dystopia in Greek means bad place, or what did the other video say? Bad place? Not a good place. Okay, yeah, so same thing. A futuristic imagined universe, you don't have to write that all down, in which oppression and illusion of a perfect society are maintained through control. Okay, so part of this dystopia, you might want to write this part down, is that there is an illusion. What is an illusion? Like, if you think about a magician is an illusionist. So they are performing tricks, right? That are not reality, okay? So it's an illusion of a perfect society. So not reality. The society is not perfect, which is maintained through control. So this perfect society is maintained through some sort of control. Okay, we kind of talked about that already. Come on. Okay. So let's look at this. Diseases like malaria would be something, I know that's kind of random, but if we were to live in a utopia, we would not want to have malaria, right? Okay, look at all of these yucky statistics. 200 million infections every year, 600,000 deaths a year from malaria. Most victims are under the age of 5. How would you implement the change to stop the spread of malaria? Well, what transmits malaria?
Mosquitoes.
Mosquitoes do, okay? So you could sterilize male mosquitoes or engineer only male mosquitoes so that they don't mate. What would be the ramifications of getting rid of mosquitoes or changing it to where there's only male mosquitoes? Well, first of all, okay, let's say if we only had male mosquitoes, what would happen?
They would all die.
They would all die. Okay. What would be the ramifications of that?
No more dengue. What are these?
Okay, so these are all fevers and viruses that mosquitoes transmit. Okay, we got yellow fever. I don't know what that first fever is. West Nile, the Zika, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, no more mosquito bites. Does anybody else get huge welts from mosquitoes? I do.
Also, when you mow too, like when you're mowing outside, there's like them that they hide in the grass and they come all out.
They attack you, right?
Yes.
Okay, but what else would happen? Okay, so let's look at the first. Hospitals and pharmaceutical companies would lose money. Well, I'm okay with that, right? Thousands of plant species would lose a group of pollinators. Well, I don't know. Maybe I could be okay with that, some plants dying. The number of migratory birds that nest in the tundra would drop by more than 50% without mosquitoes to eat. All right, so we're getting rid of some birds. Hundreds of species of fish would have to change their diet to survive. Many species of insects, spider, salamander, lizard, and frog would lose a primary food source. Okay, so we're cutting out some plants, we're cutting out some birds, we're cutting out some fish, we're cutting out insects, we're cutting out some spiders, salamanders, lizards, frogs, and we're increasing who?
Humans.
Humans. I'm good with that. Anybody else good with that? Oh. Could there be an overpopulation? I mean, this depends on how you look at it. The economy in sub-Saharan Africa would shift because there would be more people packed in more cities, not enough food, water, and resources, and then what happens? Inevitable chaos in the fight to survive, which would mean, let's see, we're not going there, which could perhaps mean more deaths.
So it just...
Could it lead to more deaths? Yes. Because then they're not getting, an overpopulation can lead to people not getting enough resources, which can lead to starvation, which can lead to death.
I know this isn't a utopia, but like with the push for electric cars, this sounds like what they're doing. They're not thinking of the probable causes that could affect it.
Okay, I can see where you're going with that. Yeah, sometimes when we as humans step in with a change that we think is good. So like they said, engineering only male species of mosquitoes. So God made mosquitoes, and I'm not saying God made mosquitoes to get rid of people. That's not what I'm saying at all. But God did make mosquitoes for a reason, and he has an ecosystem that works for a reason. And when we step in to try to mess with it, it doesn't necessarily make it better. Now, sometimes it does, but many times it doesn't. It can turn that utopia idea into a dystopia. Come on, is that it? I thought I had more. Okay. So let me hand out this paper that gives a few more characteristics of a dystopia. Let's discuss those. So look under where it says characteristics of a dystopian society. Propaganda is used to control the citizens of society. What is propaganda? Okay, so propaganda can basically be any sort of information that is controlled or twisted in a way to hold back other information, the whole truth, basically. So I want you to think about if we were, as a teacher, I were to introduce the idea of wearing school uniforms, which you already do, but let's go back 2 years ago to when you all did not wear school uniforms, okay? And I come in and I tell you guys, we're going to have this great change next year, and your grades are going to raise, you're going to get higher grades, you're not going to have to worry about, you get to sleep later in the morning, and then I just tell you all of these great things, and I'm very vague, but I tell you all these good things, okay? And then I really feed it to you. I may even omit some information. That's propaganda, okay? It's not necessarily lies, but it's omitting certain things to control the narrative. Okay, information, independent thought, and freedom are restricted. A figurehead or concept is worshipped by the citizens of the society. Citizens are perceived to be under constant surveillance. Citizens have a fear of the outside world. Citizens live in a dehumanized state. The natural world is banished and distrusted. Citizens conform to uniform exceptions. Individuality and dissent are bad. This society is an illusion of a perfect utopian world. Okay. So you all have probably seen or seen movies that take place in a dystopian society. Maybe read books about dystopian society. If you haven't, we're going to introduce several works of dystopian literature this quarter. Our first assignment, though, is going to be to compare and contrast high school with a dystopia. So school with a dystopia. Okay? You are going to compare, meaning what is similar, and then contrast, meaning what is different between high schools and dystopian societies. Okay? So, before we go into some brainstorming on the things that we could use to bolster our arguments either way, I want to look at how we actually put together a compare and contrast essay, because that is a little bit different than what we necessarily have been doing in the past. So let me bring that up. What class we were in there for a second. Okay, so you'll want to take notes on this too. Writing a compare and contrast essay. Okay, big part of it is still your thesis statement. Your introduction paragraph is still going to be structured exactly the same as every other essay. You're going to start out with a hook, you're going to have some transition sentences, and then that thesis statement is going to be the last sentence in your introductory paragraph. Okay, nothing new or different there. Now, with your coming up with a thesis statement, you're going to have those three little subpoints that you had when you're writing any other type of thesis statement for any other type of essay. But for this one, it's going to be identifying the three main points that you're going to compare or contrast within the subject. So I'm going to give you an example. You don't have to write this verbatim, but let's say that I wanted you to compare community colleges to state universities, okay? Let's say that was your topic. Your thesis, this is an example of a thesis, would be, indeed, there are significant differences between starting the higher education journey at community college and beginning at a large state university, comma. And those include, point number 1, cost considerations, point number 2, the quality of the learning atmosphere, point number 3, and having more immediate access to valuable personal support networks. Now, you're not telling me in this thesis statement whether they're similar or different in these three topics. You're telling me these are the three subpoints that we're going to be looking at and comparing and contrasting. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay. So let's say I want you to compare and contrast. You know how I love using pizza places as examples. We're going to write a compare and contrast essay on Pizza Hut versus Domino's. No, let's do Domino's versus Little Caesars, okay? So you may start out, you could use this exact same setup. You could say, indeed, there are significant differences between Domino's and Little Caesars. Those include, okay, what would be one thing, either difference or similarity? Okay, those include cost, comma,
cheese,
ingredients, and
side portions.
Sure. Or so this thesis said that there are significant differences. Now, what if we wanted to talk about how there are differences and similarities? Well, then you would simply change the thesis statement to say there are differences as well as similarities between Domino's and Little Caesars. And these include, and then you would still list this off. You're not going to tell me which one is which one has the differences and which one has the similarities until you actually get to the body points, the body paragraphs. Okay, each body paragraph is going to focus on comparing or contrasting one point. So in that sample thesis, each of those points are in the different colors up here. So cost considerations, that's going to be one complete paragraph. Quality of learning atmosphere, that's the second paragraph. And then access to personal support network. Okay. So I know this is kind of hard to see, but I want to look at this example. Of point number 1 would be to the cost to attend community college and state university. So if you are deciding that this point number 1 has mainly differences, then you're going to focus on the differences. I don't want you to like muddy the water. Just like when we look at any other essay that we've done and you have talked about points in your essays, you needed to take a strong stand, right? You need to do that in your compare and contrast. I don't want you to say, well, the cost is kind of similar, but it's kind of different.
Would this be the one where you'd want a good counterpoint as well? Or?
No, you do not need counterpoints in this at all. So this one, let's go ahead and read that body paragraph. To begin, the most obvious point of contrast between starting higher education at the state university and a community college involves the cost. So right up front, this topic sentences is saying that a big difference is the cost. For example, in 2016, the typical cost of a year at San Diego State University, just looking at tuition costs, is approximately $7,000, and that doesn't include the mandatory fee of $752. By great contrast, full-time tuition per annum at Imperial Valley College is under $1,500, etc. Okay, then you go on to include a little more within that body paragraph. So you know from that topic sentence that this point, the cost, is different. Okay, you know, is this paragraph going to talk about how they're the same, or is this paragraph going to talk about how they're different? You're not like, oh, well, maybe they're kind of different, maybe they're similar, which that doesn't make any sense to even say that out loud, because they can't be different and similar. They're either similar or different. There might be some small nuance that is similar and different at some point that you can think of, but don't use that if you can't take a firm stand on whether they're different or similar. Okay, so you're going to continue that pattern for the other two body paragraphs. You're going to conclude with a conclusion paragraph that ends with a bang, just like you always have, summing up the main differences and similarities between your two subjects. Okay, the next big thing within your compare and contrast essay is going to be your transition words. These are super, 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 super important in compare and contrast papers, and I'm going to be looking for them. They are part of your assignment for this paper. Okay, here are some examples. I'm not gonna, well, I will. Okay, when you're comparing two things that are similar, so let's say we're comparing, we think that Domino's pepperonis and Little Caesar pepperonis are very similar. They taste very similar. They're both round. They're both red. They both come from pigs. Is that where pepperoni comes from? Okay. So we might use these transition words. I might say, like Domino's, Little Caesars has pepperonis that are blah, blah, blah. Or I might say, similar to Domino's, Little Caesars has blah, blah, blah. Also, Little Caesars has blah, blah, blah. In the same way that Domino's has pepperonis that are red, Little Caesars has pepperonis that are red. Okay, so see how I'd use those transition words. Contrasting, if I'm going to say that Little Caesars is, let's say, less expensive, so it costs a lot less than Domino's, I would say that although Domino's cost a da-da-da, Little Caesars cost is blah, blah, blah. Or yet, conversely, however, on the contrary, on one hand, blah, blah, blah. You can look these up on the internet if you need ideas for transition words. But transition words are important because you don't want to just plop your information out there. I don't want to say Domino's pizza is $10, Little Caesars pizza is $5. I need a transition word to say, although Domino's pizza is $10, on the other hand, Little Caesars pizza is $5, okay? Something that transitions. So I want you to look at this paragraph that I just read out loud and see if you can find any transition words, not necessarily the ones that I mentioned, but any transition words or phrases within this paragraph. Go ahead and call them out to me if you can see any of those.
Point of contrast?
Where's point of contrast?
Up in the very top for contrast.
No, that is not a transition phrase. Thank you so much. You're amazing. To begin is a contrast, or it's a transition phrase. What about in that second sentence? At the very beginning of that second sentence?
By great contrast.
No. Well, hold on. It might be, but that's not where I'm looking yet. For example is a transition phrase. And then yes, Matthew, you were right. By great contrast, that is another transition phrase.
Would approximately work as well?
No. Okay. All right. So, transitions, compare and contrast. So now let's go to our assignment, which is going to be writing an essay on schools, comparing and contrasting schools and dystopias. So the first thing that you want to do when you are coming up with a compare and contrast essay, or even just a paragraph, let's say you're writing something for a test and it asks you to compare to or contrast two things, is I would make a list of characteristics or traits of both things. So we already have this list on that paper that I handed out. We already have the characteristics of dystopian society. So we already have a list for one part. Let's look at this list and let's see if we see any similarities or differences in high schools. So propaganda is used to control the citizens of the society. So do you think propaganda is used in schools?
Not really.
Okay. I mean, you could argue yes. You could say that, like, in chapel, Miss Melissa uses propaganda and keeps truth from you so that you are controlled. I don't think that's true, but you could argue that if you wanted to. Okay, next one. Information, independent thought, and freedom are restricted. What do you think about either? Let's look one by one. Information. Is information restricted to you and school?
Yes.
No.
Cole says no. Matthew says yes. Okay, that one could independent thought. Is independent thought restricted in school?
Here.
You could argue either way. What about if a teacher is giving a multiple choice literature test and you feel differently than the correct answer? The teacher thinks, this is a subjective question and you think that it should be this, but the teacher thinks that. No, so maybe. Freedom. What about freedom? Is freedom restricted? When you are in this school building, is your freedom restricted? Matthew says yes. How so?
You can't just walk out and
You
just go
can't.
home.
Yeah, you can't just leave when you want to leave, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you hold hands with somebody if you want to hold hands? No. Can you kiss somebody if you want to kiss somebody? No. Can you wear whatever you want to wear?
No.
No. Okay. All right. What about the next one? A figurehead or concept is worshipped by the citizens of the society. I hope we are not worshiping anyone other than God at this school.
Would God work for the same?
No. What about if we all had a worshiping attitude of Miss Melissa, because she is the leader of the school. So if you wanted to say, and honestly, when you're writing this, you do not have to use our school. You can use you can transport your mind to a public school or something like that. Mm-hmm. So if you want to say the principal was worshipped, you could. What about citizens are perceived to be under constant surveillance?
Yes, that's 100%.
Give me some. Yeah, there's not a security camera in here. So we have security cameras, right? And not only that, do we have Miss Tina in the back room is supposed to be constantly watching you, right? The teachers are constantly watching you. Citizens have a fear of the outside world. I hope you do not have a fear of the outside world.
We literally go to the outside world after school.
Okay, citizens live in a dehumanized state. I hope not. The natural world is banished and distrusted. Hope not. Citizens conform to uniform expectations. Individuality and dissent are bad. So, we could use this. You could say literally our uniforms, right? You could also say that here at Cross Creek, there is kind of a standard of what people are expected to act like, right? Because we do have that code of conduct, okay? Which is not a bad thing. Okay? The society is an illusion of a perfect utopian world. What? No?
No.
Okay, you could argue yes. You all say no, but you could argue yes. You could say that our school wants to portray that we are perfect and that we have it all together. You could say yes. Okay. Let's look at the dystopian protagonist. So this is in literature, but I think maybe you might get a better insight into comparing dystopias to high schools by looking at these qualities of a dystopian protagonist. Often feels trapped and is struggling to escape.
Yes.
Questions the existing social and political systems. Believes or feels that something is terribly wrong with the society in which she lives. Helps the audience recognize the negative aspects of the dystopian world through his or her perspective. So just kind of be thinking about those things in your mind. So when you're writing a compare and contrast essay, you do not have to focus just on the similarities. Okay? You could pick 2 similarities and 1 difference. You could pick 2 differences and 1 similarities. So you can mix it up. Or you can do 3 differences. You could come out, you could say, school and dystopias are nothing alike. You could say that. You could pick one of these and say, or 3 of these subpoints and say, they're nothing alike. Okay, that's fine with me. Or you could say, school is a form of a dystopia, and you could pick 3 that are similar. Or you could say, schools and dystopias have some things in common, while they also have some differences, comma, and then point 1, point 2, point 3. Does that make sense? Yes? Hopefully, great. Okay, so I want you to look now at those characteristics that we have just gone through, and I want you to pick 3 things that you would like to compare that are similar, or 3 things that are different, or a mixture of those. So 3 things that you must have examples or evidence, right? Okay, so this is not just going to be loosey-goosey. You have to give me an example. If you're going to say that schools, citizens live in a dehumanized state, you got to tell me what that means and how people in schools are living in a dehumanized state. So go ahead and pick those 3 things that you want that are similar, 3 things that are different, or a mixture of those 3. And Cole, you already done?
Yes.
You've already done it? Great. Okay. Matthew's got his. Mary Beth, you still thinking? Okay, so if you want to write out your outline, you can. Or if you just know how things are structured now so much because we've done this so many times and you do not have to write one out. Beginning of the essay is going to be a full paragraph. That is your opening paragraph. It's going to start with a hook. Your hook might be, did you know that utopia literally, while we think of utopia as being a perfect place, it literally means, what does it mean? What does utopia mean again?
Non-existent place.
Non-existent place, and that most utopias turn into dystopias, which means not a good place. And that could be your hook. And then you could bring in schools or something like that. Your thesis is going to be the last sentence of your opening paragraph. And then your thesis is going to name off your points, point 1, point 2, point 3, right? And then you're going to go into your body paragraph number 1, and that's going to be point number 1. So Cole, what was one of your points that you picked?
Citizens are perceived to be under constant surveillance.
Great. I think that's easy that's not easy, but that's a great one. Okay. So I'm going to guess that you're saying that they're similar.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, Matthew, what was one of your points that you picked?
Propaganda is used before it says-
Okay. Are you going to say that we do use propaganda or don't use propaganda? Okay, so that they're similar. You're saying similar too. Okay. Mary Beth, what was one of the ones that you picked?
Citizens have a fear of the outside world.
Okay, and are you going to say that's similar or different?
Similar.
Okay. Fear. So you all. Oh, that's not. So let's say that I know I took one from each one of your brainstorm. So if I was crafting a thesis statement from these 3 points, it might be something like this. Schools and dystopias have a frighteningly large number of similarities, such as students being perceived as being under constant surveillance, propaganda being used for control, and an outside fear of citizens of the outside world, or fear of the outside world by citizens. Okay? See how make that thesis statement work? Now, yeah, I'll leave that there. Okay, so your first paragraph is going to be all about constant surveillance. So what you're going to say is, in dystopian, one of the characteristics of dystopian society is that its citizens are under constant surveillance. Likewise, see transition word? Likewise, high school students feel that they are under constant surveillance because, give an example. Explain the example.
Would
Give
you
another
need to
example.
give an example of how the dystopian people are?
No, because we have not gone in depth with that. You do not have to use literature to back that up or anything like that. Okay, you're merely going to say one of the characteristics of a dystopian society is da-da-da-da, or in dystopian societies, da-da-da-da. Okay, that's all I need from that. That's a great question though, Cole. And then in point number 2, you're going to say dystopian societies use propaganda to control its citizens. Likewise, I like that word, likewise, apparently. Find another word besides likewise. In addition to using propaganda in dystopian societies, high schools also use propaganda to control their citizens, and this is how, blah-de-da-da. Okay? That makes sense? And then a closing paragraph. You guys should have this under control. You do not have to cite any sources for this, okay? No citations. So you're not going to have a works cited page or anything like that, okay? Still do not use the word I. Don't say I think this or I feel like that, okay? Just you're going to present it as it's fact. That makes sense? So tomorrow what I want you to do is to write that intro, that opening paragraph. That's all you have to do. Come up with a good hook, a couple transition sentence, and make sure you have your thesis. So please have that typed out for Thursday. Yes, Cole?
Can we have our schedules, please?
Yes. Just calm down. All right. Any questions about this assignment?
Do we have to do an outline?
You do not have to write one unless you need it. So I'm going to pop off of here.